Have you stopped to look at the things you do and question the value that they add or subtract to your ability to achieve? That's this week on the Badass Agile podcast. Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams. Greetings, team, and welcome back. Good to have you here. But why do we need to look at process overhead? Well, first, let's remember why we're here. To create an elite tribe of leaders who truly serve their clients and communities by doing what matters and what works, relentlessly chasing value and excellence like a badass. There are so many resources about what you need to do to be agile, but we're focused on who you need to become in order to lead teams. Let's pursue and perfect those fundamentals to create an unstoppable force in this industry. And remember, if this helps you, tell your friends. The thing about process is that it keeps things orderly and predictable. It makes instructions easy to understand so that we can have reliable outcomes without having to explain things repeatedly and sometimes even differently to everyone that we work with. The difficulty with process that nobody considers is that it introduces a massive amount of overhead. So in situations where you want to be lean and nimble, the process can add more cost than it does benefit. And in some cases, it can be cheaper to run things in a chaotic state and swallow the cost of inefficiency that ensues. Imagine putting everything you do on your calendar, not just your meetings and your deliverables, but meals, activities, conversations, naps, and breaks. You'd spend all of your time documenting and none of your time living, not to mention the kind of regimented life you'd create for yourself. The other thing to consider is that the cost of establishing the perfect process, which usually takes a lot of time, experimentation, and refinement to get it exactly right for the widest number and types of people, is also very, very high. Think of the lineup ropes in the bank. When things are extremely busy, the ropes are there to ensure that customers have a simple way of understanding what's going on and have an easy-to-understand way of observing the rules of decorum. The first person goes first, the last person goes last. Everyone understands how customers are prioritized, and it even makes it easier to tell how long it might be before you get your turn. As a bonus, nobody has to explain these rules to customers on a day-to-day basis, because we've all seen the format before. We pretty much know how it works. But there are some costs and overheads. You have to choose a system that you know will be universally understood, or the system itself requires some explaining. Not to mention, you have to buy the system in the first place. And in situations where first in, first out isn't appropriate, for example, triaging patients in the hospital, the system just wouldn't work. So in fact, in rare cases where a customer comes in to a bank and needs to see a teller right away or they're going to miss their flight, then the fairness and effectiveness of the system might even break down. But there's one other thing we haven't considered. What if you go into a bank and there's nobody else in line? Do you still go through the ropes? If you do, then you exert tremendous energy because of the system, not due to the absence of it. So does that make process good or bad? Well, humans desire certainty and safety. They like having processes to follow. They like linear things with start and end points. But the randomness and complexity of work and delivering stuff makes it really hard to draw flowcharts for all of the things we could do in a day. Not to mention what that does to a team's sense of autonomy. The beauty of the tools we have in our hands now, like Scrum or Lean or others, is the simplicity of the process. It's meant to keep you in the realm of right practice using simple, lightweight decision tools. All of the expectations are not handled by creating more detailed processes, but by trusting in teams to make the right adaptations and revisions informally. Yes, you can document them. Yes, you can train them. But wouldn't it be so much easier to just post a sign near the clock in the team room? So really what I'm saying is that process can be good and process can be bad. So how do you determine whether a process is intrusive or wasteful, or if it's beneficial? Well, I'm sure there's a scientific or well understood way, but common sense should guide whether process is something that we need to add more of, or whether we would benefit by cutting or avoiding process altogether instead. If the thing you're doing is highly regulated and mistakes could result in damaging fines or other consequences, then more process is probably necessary. If the thing that you're doing is highly dangerous or involves human safety, then more process is probably necessary. But in most other cases, you can either improve certainty through careful selection and upfront training of staff, or through minimal processes that are documented simply and open to change and improvement over time. Let's take a moment on that first point. Choosing and training people with not only the right expertise, but also the commitment to fundamentals goes a long way toward reducing process. Here I'm talking about specifically selecting for your teams wherever possible people who already have the right skill sets and already have the mindsets that are required to do the work correctly, accurately, and with excellence more often. That can go a long way to minimizing the base level of documentation that you have to do with that team. But there's something else that you have to watch for. In our space, we choose to adopt Agile specifically because it eliminates the bureaucratic red tape and formalized gate-wise processes, yet how many times have you heard statements like this around Agile adoption? We need to plan and create templates for enterprise-wide Agile adoption. We need to strategize and create governance for innovation and creativity. We need to add some rigor back into the process for approving Agile projects. Or we need more rules and rigor around Agile reporting. You see what's happening there? These are the kinds of areas you have to be aware of because you don't always see them happening when they happen. And I don't know if it's because I feel guilty taking away everyone's controls or reports, or if it's because my alarms didn't go off when it started happening, but I've had a few of these and let them go past me accidentally in my career. See, all of these statements are saying, Agile is great, but I miss my certainty, put it back. But they're dressed up in the guise of scaling agility or enterprise agility. These are the worst kinds of attempts at process because they're pretending to support the very system you just put in to reduce process overhead. So what do you do if you see these things happening? You challenge them. Look for the insidious types of processes that claim to make Agile more enterprise-friendly or enterprise-ready. The basic argument is that making valuable things that customers will buy is more enterprise-friendly than anything else you can do on the process side. Trying to reduce failure rates with expensive process only to remove the very thing that helps you get more competitive is just foolish. It just doesn't make sense. If you want to truly scale, you have to create practices that work for your specific environment. There's no point arguing to eliminate process, but it must be kept away from innovation centers and Agile teams because it directly hinders their ability to work. The best approach is to create not best practices, because this implies a finished journey of discovering what works, but instead to give starting points. A first experiment that can then be adapted. Start small with process, experiment, learn, and improve, rather than starting big and having to tear it all away after it's cost you. Now that's another point. Whatever you build, you have to be willing to completely tear it down and build it back up again if it's not working. You have to be eager to fail as always in Agile, because failing almost always reveals better options. And remember this, when it comes to the right amount of process for your team and your Agile implementation, there is no right. There's only right for you. So avoid expansive, prescriptive things that are aimed at the widest types of implementation, the greatest number of people, and the largest range of circumstances. Look, it's okay to plan to avoid disaster, but you cannot control chaos. So be prepared this week to carefully examine the processes that you have everywhere and be prepared to evaluate if they're truly adding value or if they're slowing you down. And if they're slowing you down, find a way to remove them. If you'd like more inspirations like these, I invite you to stop in every weekday, grab the latest iteration of my new book. It's all about the daily inspirations and reminders that reinforce badass mindsets and habits. You can go to badassagile.com and subscribe to my mailing list for an early look at the coming week's pages, or you can subscribe to the book directly at medium.com. Just search for the working title, Field Notes for the Agile Leader. Folks, thank you for listening. You can reach out at badassagile.com and find me on Twitter at badass_agile. And I'll see you next time.